Namaste, Jai Hind. Welcome to this session of Indic Talks organized by Center for Indic Studies, Indus University at Ahmedabad. I'm very happy to be joined today by Professor Subhadeep Banerjee, who is a scientist by profession. He is an associate professor of chemistry at BITS Pilani KK Birla, Goa campus. In addition to his academic work, he is passionate about creative writing, modern history, classic Hollywood movies, and music. And today we are going to discuss about his debut novel, The Hidden Patriot. The name of the book, which seems so intriguing, and over the course of this discussion, we will unravel the reason behind such a name. But I'll just give a brief introduction to today's talk. As the name goes, Hidden Patriot, the book is set in the pre-independence era. It talks about various unsung warriors who fought for the freedom of this country and remain unsung and forgotten post-independence. And in a way, this book is also a tribute to all such heroes, all such warriors whom we must remember today. And as we all know that the history of independence movement in this country needs to be revisited again and again, because much of the glorious aspect has been missing in our textbooks and in the formal curriculum present in schools and colleges. So books like Professor Shubhadeep's one gives us a window into understanding the stories which were never told before. So, without taking much time, I welcome you, sir, on behalf of CIS Indus University. And I would just start by a simple question and would like to ask you what was the inspiration behind writing this book before we go much into the details of the storyline. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me here, Ritul, and considering me worthy of this opportunity. So, thing is, I was always, as a child, interested in literature, things like that. But my father, he had different ideas. He wanted me to study, take up science, and as you know, is usually the case with parents. They want you to go into some sort of a technical education. He said minimum you have to take up science. Then you go on to do whatever else you want to do with your life after that. So pretty much that sums it up as to the burning desire was always there, but for the sake of stability and career growth, I started on a different course, and I have been very successful because, as you said, I'm an associate professor of chemistry at a very prestigious institution. So it is the education that I received in the scientific field that has brought me thus far. But interest in passion for poetry or literature was always there, and I was always very passionate about history because a lot of the questions about our freedom movement used to bother me as to how did we really come about where we were, who were the people who contributed truly. And once you start reading up, a lot of things genuinely cook in your brain. And when situation in life is right, you start thinking of writing, which sort of rekindles your passion at a which was there at a very young age. Why did I choose this topic? No one particular reason, but sort of I used to think that do we really value our independence to the extent that we do? Was it really a cakewalk? We often hear that the revolutionary movement was a parallel theme again over and above the non-violent movement, and that wasn't very successful. Was it really so? because a lot of the truth about our freedom movement is not necessarily out in public domain yet. How was life for the people, the ordinary people in the British Raj? For example, that was when you read the back cover of my book. This is the front cover, and this is the back cover. When I read it, so India under the Calcutta 1943, India under the British Raj is a virtual police state. To maintain order, the Raj seeks out loyalists and cultivates them to keep an eye out for troublemakers. Little bit of these things as a child you gather from the grapevine when you grow up, especially being a Bengali, hearing stories about revolutionaries from your parents, from your surroundings, watching it in TV serials, that you get the vibes of it, but that's about it. You never get to know more than that. And for instance, the writers building attack of 8th December 1930, about which I was telling you earlier in the day, how many people outside of Bengal know it? Even the finer details most people will not know, but those actions should be understood, should be celebrated. And these people are the real heroes. For just pause for a moment and think, had someone like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, whom you have on the background, I mean, the colossal leader as far as our freedom movement is concerned, or even someone like Surjo Sen or Jotindranath Mukherjee, the redoubtable Baga Jotin, had they come to positions of political power and been able to influence decisions in independent India, how different would that have been? I mean, it's all very well doing agitations, but fighting an unequal war against a more powerful enemy is never easy. And even if there was limited success, we should know those, we should celebrate those. And that's why I decided to sort of, write the book. And COVID provided sort of the ideal opportunity to spend some time into it so that I could concentrate on this, because when COVID happened, a lot of our lives got completely overturned. And my personal COVID recovery has a lot to do with this book, because when I got afflicted with COVID last year in April, May, I was in hospital for more than a month. And I had written little over 50% of the book before that. And in hospital, I was not necessarily doing very well all the time. Recovery was slow, and sometimes it was looking really bad. But I used to always feel that God forbid if something really worse happens, who's going to come back and finish the book? So I had to finish the book, and that did serve as an inspiration. So in that sense, 2021 was a very interesting year of my life. I had a very bad experience health-wise, but the year culminated very nicely with the launch of this book. So yeah, over to you. If you have, please ask more questions. That would be a lot easier for me.
So this is the book, and if I am correct, this is a novel. This is a fictional story
That is correct.
of certain events that actually took place. So this is not, yeah.
Not necessarily. It isn't exactly. So no, the events are also fictionalized per se, but it is in the backdrop. So the let me read the back cover. It will give
Yes.
people an overview as to what the book is about.
Yes. Please do that. Also, let me put my next question so that you can take them both together. So, the please comment on the title of the book, The Hidden Patriot. And as you said, it is inspired from real events. Also, please kindly reflect upon the real stories that have inspired this book, and who were the real patriots or the hidden patriots about whom we actually know nothing. You spoke about Bagha Jotin, you spoke about Binoy Badal Dinesh, but I am not very sure if people from outside Bengal have heard about them. Or if we take the example of Chapekar Bandhu from Maharashtra, so someone from outside Maharashtra, they don't know about them. So that's the unfortunate thing that has happened. So I would like to hear your comments on them. Over to you.
Thank you. So here is the sort of the book blurb, if you may call it. Calcutta, 1943. India under the British Raj is a virtual police state. To maintain order, the Raj seeks out loyalists and cultivates them to keep an eye out for troublemakers. Professor Amol Ghosh, a well known playwright and a darling of the British Raj, is being assessed as a potential collaborator and gets entangled in a labyrinth of lies and deception. What misfortune would gravitate him towards anti British activities inspired by Netaji Subhash and turn him into a suspect? How would Ghosh emerge unscathed to become a government minister post independence? And what damning discovery would he make about his past life? The answers to these questions would be revealed in this journey of surveillance, self realization, and gratitude. So, like I said, it is not any one particular event that inspired me to write this book, but the overall milieu of information that is already available, many important historical events. And I used to always sort of ponder to myself that the revolutionary movements, how did they work? How did people go about their plans, their successes, their failures? So before writing this book, I did a lot of search on the internet sometime in the middle of 2020. And now a lot of the British intelligence files, the police files, they are now freely available on the internet. The fact that the government would try to infiltrate these secret societies through planting their men, that these people in turn would keep an eye out for government informers. It was a real cat and mouse game. For instance, how did they manage to procure arms? I do not know, you may be aware or not aware of the Roda and Company arms heist of 1914, where one of the employees of the Roda Company managed to smuggle out, I think, 50 Mauser pistols and 20,000 plus ammunition through one bullock cart extra. And that had, those Mausers were used by a lot of people in various different revolutionary acts. So unless there was inside help, this would have never been possible. So when I wrote this book, I had those sorts of things in mind, because let us say about Bagha Jotin, about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, about Master Surjo Sen, we already know, at least in Bengal, definitely we do. And about Netaji, everybody knows in India. But the small people, the clerk working in a British ICS officer's office, sympathetic to the revolutionaries, but unable to do anything directly, how could he help? So my maternal side is from Chittagong, and little stories I've heard from my maternal grandmother. She claimed to have seen Surjo Sen, and you may or may not be knowing that Chittagong Bengali is so obscure. Chittagong Bengali dialect is so obscure, it's very hard to understand. So the events of 18th April 1930, the Chittagong uprising, or as they call it, the armory loot or armory raid, it was planned to perfection. Nobody knew anything. And there is a very famous book by a journalist called Monini Chatterjee, Do and Die, based on which that movie Khele Hum Ji Jaan Se was also made in 2010. So there is a lot of thing already out there. If somebody wants to write a fictional book, the inspiration is all out there. The plot in this story is original. It is mine. It is not in a single event of history that I have tried to chronicle. But the backdrop 1943, the famine in Calcutta had just about started, and it was getting worse off. And India was in the middle of the Second World War. The INA was gathering strength, and in about a year's time, in April 1944, the INA mounted an attack through Burma and Imphal, trying to capture and liberate India from the British. The INA's underground was also trying to be active in Calcutta. The book has that imprint. How, because I have read comments in sort of research papers and books and all, that the British were worried that if the Japanese dropped Subhash Bose onto the heart of Calcutta through a parachute, the whole Calcutta would rise up in revolt. Unfortunately, no such thing happened. But what was the reality like? What was it like for those police officers? Because if you read Netaji's speeches from Berlin and then from Singapore, he's asking the men in arms under the British Indian Army, Indian police forces, to rise up and revolt. That may not have happened immediately, but it did eventually happen after the INA trials of 1945, where the Indians in the British military got to the realization that these people were not Japanese agents, they were patriots fighting for India's freedom. So all the more reason to be sympathetic towards them, rather than, accuse them of being disloyal to the British sovereign. In any case, the British sovereign was never truly Indian. So the name, therefore, the Hidden Patriot, I thought of this name was because could we think of an ordinary person who is unassuming and not really interested in big revolutionary talk, and who doesn't know much about these things, but it's a story of human conscience, how that is awakened, and he becomes a patriot in the end of the story. So, and why hidden? Because he's in a position where he cannot necessarily surface, otherwise his cover will be blown. So after writing the book, I went on to read subsequently Chandrachud Ghosh's magnum opus, biography on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, An Inconvenient Nationalist, that came out. And in that, as I was telling you, there is a paragraph that as to how he managed to receive information from the special branch about people who were spying on him. Just imagine, I'm reading something about spies working against me, 12 o'clock at night at my home. I read that, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, the file goes back in the special branch office. And you know where the special branch office is in Calcutta. It's Lord Sina Road, and Netaji's house was in Elgin Road. It's like 10-15 minutes walk, probably, maybe a little more. Now, who must have been bringing the files over and dutifully placing it back? Must have been some hidden patriot. So what I wrote through a little bit of imagination, subsequently I found that is true. There is a context to it. Like, as I was telling you about Binoy Badol Dinesh, the movie that has come out in Calcutta, when Binoy Boshu executes Assistant Superintendent of Police Lauman because of his brutalization of women prisoners in particular, and then he is escaping after the execution from Dhaka. We do not know this, but it is very nicely shown in the movie that the district magistrate of Dhaka is there in the railway station, helping them escape. There's your hidden patriot. And there are many of them who have helped us in our independence in howsoever small way they could. So this story is in effect celebrating them, and in effect it's a call for an individual's conscience to be awakened to a situation and take the right decision under circumstances. So that's what's the general idea behind the story. Over to you.
Thank you for the wonderful explanation. And as you said very rightly, and to some extent, the plan of insurrection which Netaji planned from Berlin and from other places, it did take place. But later in 1946, and we witnessed that in the form of the INA revolt in the Royal Indian Navy and Army. So
That is
that
correct.
did take place. So taking from that, we see that the independence we cherish today was not a result of a peaceful struggle as it is generally projected. So, a lot of meticulous planning, a lot of struggle has gone into uh, achieving freedom, which we are not aware of.
Exactly.
So, to set it straight once for all, I would like to ask from you your take on how we achieve freedom. Because when we talk about revolutionaries and freedom movement, there is a tendency of doing a token service. Okay, they also did, everybody did their part. But the fact is, to some extent, and it is historic, it could be historically proven also, that the independence which eventually happened was because of the success of the resistance plan. Here, I'm not intending to kind of denigrate any other movement, but the historical facts do speak for themselves. So, your take on the same.
See,
Over to you.
I'll take names actually. I read a book by Major General G.D. Bakshi. I read two of his books. One on Netaji's The Bose and Indian Samurai, and the other book was Gandhi or British Bose, Who Won Us Freedom. In that book, he quotes declassified British military intelligence files and conversations between the heads of governors of various Indian provinces and the Viceroy of India, Lord Wavell, and the Field Marshal Auchinleck, the Commander in Chief of the British Armed Forces, as to how India in 1945, 1946, the effect of the INA trials and the how much it captured the public's imagination, as to how difficult it was becoming to manage India with Indian troops because of the strong pro-INA sympathies during the time. So, in short, the final blow, if I may say, on the coffin of British Empire, that was because of the fear that 1857 was likely or could happen all over again. And this time, the Indian troops, were they going to turn the guns on their own people or their British masters? Nobody knew. And there was this always this lurking fear that Subhash Chandra Bose hadn't actually perished in the so-called 18th August 1945 air crash, which we now know he didn't. And there was this lurking fear that will he come back? What's going to happen? Because if you read Anuj Uthar's books, the British and American inquiries clearly conclude that there was no such air crash on that date. And that means they were interested to know what happened to this man. And the political situation in India, the agitations, the pro-INA sympathies in the ordinary soldiers, and so those were the reasons why I think the British decided to leave. And now, as we know, the conversation between Justice Fani Bhushan Chakrabarti 1956 and Lord Clement Attlee, where Lord Attlee clearly states that the reason for leaving India, giving independence to India, was because of the INA activities of.
Yes. And I think what INA trials did to the freedom movement was the last stage in the battle. But even much before Netaji and even much before the conception of INA, I think there were many revolutionaries. If we
That's correct.
start by Sri Aurobindo, from his time onwards, then Barin Ghosh, his own brother.
Yes,
So
yes.
all of them,
Raj Bihari Bose.
Raj Bihari Bose, then up to Shurjoda, Master
Yes,
Shurjo
yes,
Sen.
yes,
Even
yes.
he had this same vision of plotting an insurrection in the British army and inspiring the Indians in the army to fight for the cause of the freedom of their motherland.
That
So
is correct.
that is there's a long battle that we did fight. So,
Yes.
along with that, I just would like you to highlight the stories of such hidden patriots like Shurjoda or like Binoy Badol Dinesh. Any story that you would like our visit, or the members of the audience to listen to, such stories that we are not aware of. Any such inspiring story with people taking a lot of risk, executing their plans, going all ahead to kind of achieve their target. Such inspiring story like the one you initially mentioned about procuring the guns. So anything of that sort, if you would like to narrate.
Yeah, there are like many stories. So maybe I'll just tell you, show you or read some excerpts from my book, and get people interested in it and read about it. Would that be fine if I can just do some pages in the
Sure,
book?
sure, sure. The way you like it, sir.
Yeah. So let me say, I put a table of contents. Usually, a fictional book doesn't have that. So there are 10 chapters, and I'll just read the chapter headings. So first chapter is The Raj Seeks New Loyalists. And I'll read the first page. Calcutta, 1943. The British Raj was being continuously threatened by militant activities of several underground revolutionary groups. They were resisting British rule through violent anti-government actions like targeted killings of European government officials and their Indian subordinates and street demonstrations against British rule. Yeah. Often such ideal citizens were showered with awards and positions and utilized actively to infiltrate the revolutionary groups. So the government knew what it was doing. It wasn't necessarily easy. So the theme that I have built in the story, and I'll tell you what the theme is. The theme that I had built in the story has essentially 5 elements to it. The first element is a captive population inside a police state where every aspect of the life is spied upon and government controlled. The third is a surveillance. So that's why I say Professor Amol Ghosh, a well-known playwright and a darling of the British Raj, is being assessed as a potential collaborator and gets entangled in a labyrinth of lies and deception. So a surveillance operation, then what misfortune would gravitate him towards anti-British activities inspired by Netaji Subhash and turn him into a suspect? So what misfortune that leads to a change of heart? And finally, gratitude. So the elements are a captive population, a police state, a surveillance operation, a change of heart, and gratitude. Something dramatic happens to this man. He is not necessarily, he is neither towards the revolutionaries nor towards the government. Both parties are interested in him, but he steers clear of both of them. But such is the brutal nature of the times that even a man like him is not left unmolested, and he has to finally take a stand. But is he the hidden patriot? Was he alone, or was there somebody else also who finally, makes the difference? And that's where the gratitude element comes in. So there are some aspects of, story writing which I had learned somewhere. I'll just mention that. So this is a technique called setup and payoff. Like you introduce something very quickly in the very beginning of part of the story, and later on you mention it or you refer back to it. And I'll say how I make use of that. So in the first chapter, Professor Amol Ghosh is felicitated as an ideal citizen, and he's been given an award. So he writes a poem praising the British. Later on, his students ask him, why do you write such nonsensical poetry? And then he gives his own explanation. But the poem goes, those few good men, once upon a time in the East, a heaven on earth did exist, enriched with wealth, wisdom, and health. He is referring to his own country. But as time went by, greed and deceit overtook the lives, turning this heaven to hell, and the old glory decayed and fell. And then he says that the British came and helped us and recovered us. And it sounds like very praising the British, which is probably 1943 is not the right time to do so. But in the end of the poetry, so here I pledge to enrich my mind with these values of life, indeed so fine, with a dream to return my land to its glorious past, towards freedom, justice, and peace at last. That's how the poem ends. That's he's talking about his inner desire. But see, this inner desire catches the eye of Deputy Commissioner of Special Branch, Daniel Brown, who is a friend, by the way, of Professor Amol Ghosh. Now, in the next chapter, a surveillance operation is conceived. Daniel Brown is in a conversation with his subordinate, Assistant Commissioner Ashim Roy, and Roy is asked a question. Brown asks Roy, tell me something quite frankly. What is your opinion about this Amol Ghosh? This is two police officers speaking privately. And Roy replies, it sounds like a Bengali in awe of the British. Brown's like, I know. You remember the last line from his poem the other day at the function? And Roy's like, no, sir. Brown then says, to freedom and justice and some other things he mentioned as a desire for India. Why would a loyal British subject think of freedom? Freedom from what? So an innocent line in a poem that a man like Amol Ghosh of very high moral standing is stating, even that is being viewed suspiciously by a career police officer who is here to enforce the British Raj. So this was the time that we used to live in, and as you see, the overzealous action of this police officer, what the consequences would be because of that. Then there is another thing called the character arc, which implies a change of personality induced by circumstances. This character arc theme plays out very importantly throughout the novel. Many people undergo character transformations in response to the ever-changing circumstances, and primary of them is the Hidden Patriot. So who the Hidden Patriot is, that discovery is going to be made only towards the end. So yeah, I mean, there are very many interesting things we could go on to talk, but let me also leave it over to you to ask more specific questions that may come to your mind.
Surely. I mean, the entire plot seems to be so gripping. I mean, once you start reading the book, you would not even like to put it down before completing reading the entire novel. So, I feel to some extent that this genre is completely new, and as we also discussed over this before also, that not many writers firstly choose this subject, writing about independence, that too in the fictional domain. And also when it comes to writing about history, we do not have much books on the revolutionary freedom movement. So what led you to choose this genre? And I feel that this genre has a particular it targets a particular audience, and delivering history through fiction, I think it would serve a greater purpose in connecting the dots, and also to give a flavor of the revolutionary movement to the readers. And it would also open up the fact that how we actually achieve freedom. So not everybody likes to read a lot of documented historical books, voluminous records. So books like these can cater to their specific need and also spread the message.
Right, right. So the selection of genre was very obvious for me because I mean, I had, what should I say, my upbringing, getting to know, I was always interested in history. And like, as you say, there are not that many books available. And I completely agree with what you were saying, that reading voluminous books sometimes can be overwhelming. So there is not much storytelling, as we can say. There is not much storytelling with regards to the revolutionaries of our freedom movement. There is, of course, there is. It is not like there is not at all, but we read a lot of books about in the matters of the heart, the romantic domain, or self-help books, psychology books, and variety of normal crime thrillers happening in our contemporary times. But the most happening times, if you even just consider crime and fiction, was pre 1947. So why not look into that, look at the history around, and make something out of it, which will serve as a tribute to the revolutionaries, also serve to inform and update the present generation about what used to be happening, and yeah, be that make a sort of a documented version of excuse me, the times that they were. That's one of the main purposes of historical fiction. It is because even though it is fiction, it has to be well researched to be relevant to the times. For instance, street names, those have to be like the way they were. And street names, some buildings may have completely vanished from a particular location. What sort of cars they used, what sort of weapons did the revolutionaries use, what sort of weapons, for instance, the Calcutta police used. Now, so this, and while researching for the book, the Calcutta Police Museum website has a lot of details actually. They show what sort of arrests they used to make back in 1930s, 40s, what that the fact that communist literature was probably not acceptable, or they used to use a stencil duplicator, or what is known as a mimeograph, to copy. The revolutionaries used to keep these. So I learned about what a mimeograph is, and it's like a small scale copy machine that's there in the story. Then little things about the past to make it more relevant, even though I have written it in a more contemporary style, so that while reading, people of the present times feel that connect. And so sometimes you may feel that a not so character of a not so educated person is also speaking in English, but that's besides the point. English for me is just a means of communicating well, which I can do. I'm more comfortable at. It is not to uh, question or upgrade somebody's literacy level back then. So a lot of people tend to put in Bengali dialogues or Hindi dialogues, which I've tried to avoid to make it uniform. So these are the things essentially. That's what has put together the story. And I am also learning myself. This is the first book. I have very close friends who have read the book, given me advice. Some of them are here also in this participants. So I'm also listening to them and working. Right now, I'm working on a prequel, which is the backstory. So the Hidden Patriot is 1943. So then I'm also working on a story from 1939 using the same characters. And I have its name suggested by my wife. I like to call it The Detective's Deceit. So who will deceive whom? Because much like we celebrate the revolutionaries, we also should look at the dark characters which often led to failures. That is not necessarily discussed very often, because in India we did not have what is known as a proper truth and reconciliation, because the last chapter of this book says truth and gratitude post independence, and that is why it says in the blurb, and what damning discovery would he, Amol Ghosh, make about his past life? The answers to these questions would be revealed in this journey of surveillance, self-realization, and gratitude. So this is a little bit of my imagination, but how many of us got to read what was happening with us? How many of us got to make those damning discoveries? I'm not entirely sure. So what was the reason? Because we are told a story of it all just happened very nice, and no, it happened so many years ago. That's also one of the reasons we do not have a strong connect with our past. Because one of the things Prime Minister Narendra Modi said some years ago about when the Netaji files were partly declassified was, if we do not know our history, if we do not know where we came from, we will never be able to be sure as to where we are going to. So these things are very, very important.
As you just said, I mean, if we are exposed to such inspiring stories, we will be inspired to the deepest core of our being. Because youth or the youngsters, they get motivated through action. And when so much of it is happening and we are not aware of, I think such books can do a great service. And the young readers, they prefer reading, pick up quick reads that can also entertain them to some extent. They look forward to read something for relaxation. So I
Well,
think,
I'll just interject a little bit. I
sure,
mean,
sure.
the young people were the ones who were at the forefront of what was happening. Just because they were shooting at the Britishers and throwing bombs doesn't make them any less intelligent. Did not make them any less intelligent. They were extremely brave,
Yes,
exceptionally daring people. I am sure you've heard of a person called Beena Das, right?
yes, yeah.
She was younger than you when she fired those 4 bullets at Governor Stanley Jackson. She stood first in Calcutta University. When was this? 1932 or exact year? I cannot remember.
Even I can't remember, but then there are people, women like Shanti Ghosh and Suniti Chaudhary.
Yes, I was
Yeah,
thinking of the same even
yeah,
as we
yeah.
were talking.
They were, I think they were just 16.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. It was the district magistrate in Midnapur, I think, was it? Just imagine, what did these people live for? What did these people die for?
and when I just read about them in one of the books written by Kamala Dashgupta. It's a compendium of the stories. There
Okay.
it was written that when they were given life imprisonment, they were very furious in the court. They said, "We want to die as patriots. You must hang us." So these are the words of 16-year-old girls. So let's
Then
imagine.
imagine, just
Yes,
imagine what were those times. What were those times? These are the examples that you have to bring forth to the present generation. These are the examples that we have to celebrate. Imagine a 16-year-old girl telling some 50-year-old British magistrate that, why aren't you hanging me? This is
yes,
unthinkable. It's
unthinkable.
unthinkable.
Yes. You said that post independence we didn't have anything like truth and reconciliation. So we had people in our system who opened fire on Indians during the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And post independence, they continued with their jobs, they got promotions and led a comfortable life. So I think most of them who served the British continued to lead a comfortable and luxurious life post independence. And those who gave their all died for this country, their relatives, or those who were found guilty, they continued to live a life in miserable conditions. They were tortured, they were targeted. So, what sort of a freedom we achieve when?
That is a
Uh,
very valid question,
yes,
because ultimately, if you think of it, that is why technically what we had in 1947 was a transfer of power. It wasn't freedom per se, it was transfer of power. Freedom is what, if you have seen those images of helicopters flying and rescuing people off the US Embassy in South Vietnam in 1975. That's the side of a side winning and a side losing. The losing side runs. The losing side is never sent off in a decent farewell. Now, I'm not suggesting you throw every British on the into the Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, or you kill everybody else. No, but the freedom that we had or was governed by the, as much as I know, the Government of India Act 1935. So whoever served the British must continue to be doing so, and you cannot necessarily, hold them back for their wrongs. So as much as I know, South Africa, I think little bit that I know, they had done this Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the African National Congress came to power. No such thing happened in India. So there's a sad story we have to live with. We are at least, and so many years have gone past. Imagine the Indian National Army soldiers were never allowed back in the Indian Army after independence. How shameful was that? The Royal Indian Navy mutineers, they were like tortured, brutalized. The Neelganj massacre of the INA soldiers, how many were killed exactly, I do not know. But these were the people who were butchered in the name of handing power over or continuity of government. And as we now know from the declassified files, that Subhash Chandra Bose's family was spied upon till 1968, and a security liaison officer from Delhi was giving reports to MI5 in England. So were we
Yes,
really free? And perhaps that has a connection as to why the Netaji files are not being fully released. I don't want to go into that domain, but there is a lot more known to the higher ups than what we know. And that
yes.
has a lot to do with how we are influenced, or how or what we perceive to be true and what the reality actually is.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, I just would like to share over the last couple of months, I got the opportunity to meet two surviving INA veterans. One is Lieutenant Asha Sahai Dadiji, who joined the Rani Jhansi Regiment of Indian National Army at a very young age. And the other is Parmanand Yadav Dadaji. He is aged 103 years of
My
age.
God.
And he, when you visit him, and if you say Jai Hind, he still gets inspired, and his call of Jai Hind is much louder than yours. So that's his motivation, conviction, and the family members tell me that these people, they were tortured, they were targeted post independence, and they were the worst sufferers after independence was sought. So that was the condition, and it is not even a matter of past. This has a reflection on our history writing. Even today, the ones who were the collaborators and loyalists are held as the patriots of the highest ranks. And those
Right.
who actually fought for freedom, they are being branded as misguided revolutionaries with impractical plans.
That is most unfortunate, but you hope with time things change. People get a more clearer idea about the truth as to how we finally managed to win our freedom. And
Yes,
so a lot of times people ask as to why is that important. So many years have passed. What's that going to change? And then I'll say only one thing: what our respected prime minister said, that if we do not know our history, if we do not know where we came from, we'll have no idea as to where we should be headed for.
very true. We can't change the events in the past, the unfortunate events, but we can surely change the narrative for good so that the people of this country, the
You know,
youngsters, get
I do
to get
not know
hope.
how much of I you may be or you may know. I do not know what your position is with regards to the Gumnami Baba theory. But having read all of Anuj Dhar's books, I strongly believe that he was none other than Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose himself. I think all of India should go to Faizabad, bow down, and apologize in front of the samadhi that is there.
Yes,
That's not how it should have ended for him.
yes,
So I posted the links, the Amazon links for my book in the chat box. That is, if anybody is interested, they can click and have a look. So yeah, I maybe over to you again.
yes. So we can't go back in time and do what was required to be done at that point of time. The honor that had to be bestowed on the real heroes who brought us independence. But we can definitely remember them in our thoughts every day, and we can thank them for the sacrifices, for their tireless days of planning and execution of their plans, for their leaving aside everything, even their families, their luxurious lives, their careers, and just jumping into the war. So we must remember all of them and pay our reverence on daily basis. With
Exactly.
that
And
note, yeah,
one
yeah,
more thing I would like to add, and this celebration celebrating the revolutionaries in no ways Am I encouraging hating the British people? People are not evil. In one movie, I do not know if you've seen the movie called Odessa File. There was a character, Solomon Tauber, who was describing tortures happening in Nazi concentration camps, and then he says people are not evil, individuals are evil. The individuals who were running affairs of the British Raj, they were doing a bad thing. They were not necessarily doing the right thing. And the fact that the history is not properly chronicled, that needs to be revisited. And because a lot of good things happened to India because of the British intervention also, there is no denying that. But overall, the British Raj, British Empire was not a good thing. This is something internationally, it is not very well understood, it is not very well accepted, and probably it's time that needs to change.